It was supposed to be a private conversation, a closed door, a quiet exchange between adults navigating a medical crisis. But one small voice changed everything. Just 1 minute ago, Princess Anne reportedly uncovered a truth that no one realized had already slipped beyond palace walls. Young Prince Louis overheard a conversation about Catherine's treatment, and what he heard may have shaken the royal family to its core. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The discussion had been carefully contained. A small circle. Trusted voices. Measured tones. Catherine's ongoing recovery was still being handled with caution, even in victory. Though she had been declared cancer-free, follow-ups, evaluations, and guarded medical phrasing continued behind closed doors. Words like monitoring, uncertainty, and complications were spoken softly, strategically. It was never meant for young ears. The children had been shielded with precision. Or so everyone believed. The assumption had always been that innocence could be preserved through silence, that closed doors meant closed understanding. But children do not require full sentences to grasp tension. They read pauses, they hear shifts in voice, and on that particular afternoon, Louis was closer than anyone realized. Perhaps in the hallway, perhaps at the top of a staircase, close enough to catch a fragment. Not the entire conversation, just enough. Reports suggest it wasn't a dramatic declaration he heard. It was subtler than that. A reference to if something changes. A mention of risk. A pause heavy enough to alter the air in the room. For adults, these are precautionary phrases. For a child, they can sound like danger. And it wasn't long before the shift in Louis became noticeable. Quieter. Watchful. Asking questions that did not align with what he had officially been told. Princess Anne was the first to sense it. Known for her sharp instincts and unwavering composure, she noticed something different in his gaze. This was not mischief. This was processing. A child attempting to decode fear without context. Anne understood immediately that something had slipped. She did not panic. She observed. Listened. And slowly, carefully, the truth surfaced. Louis had heard more than anyone intended. The realization carried weight. It wasn't about secrecy alone. It was about protection, about the fragile line between shielding and underestimating. In trying to preserve innocence, had they underestimated perception? The subtle but chilling truth settled in. Children absorb more than adults think. They sense what is unsaid. They connect emotional dots even when facts are withheld. Inside palace walls, tension quietly escalated. What exactly had Louis interpreted? Did he believe Catherine was in danger again? Had the word uncertainty planted fear that could not easily be erased? These were not questions for headlines. They were questions for family. But the impact was immediate. Innocence had brushed against anxiety. And that changes everything. But to understand why this moment rattled Princess Anne so deeply, we must first revisit how carefully Catherine's battle was being managed behind closed doors. Catherine's treatment was never just medical, it was strategic. Every appointment, every update, every word shared with the public was calculated with precision. The monarchy was walking a tightrope between honesty and protection. And inside that fragile balance, one misplaced sentence could unravel the calm they worked so hard to maintain. From the moment the diagnosis was confirmed, the journey became two battles unfolding at once. One was physical appointments, procedures, consultations that carried both hope and uncertainty. The other was narrative: how much to reveal, when to speak, how to protect Catherine's dignity while reassuring a watchful nation. Nothing was accidental. Even silence was intentional. Every pause, every carefully crafted statement was designed to prevent panic while preserving privacy. The intensity of the medical journey reshaped daily life. Treatment schedules dictated rhythm. Recovery days were guarded fiercely. There were clinical conversations that carried gravity, words spoken in hushed tones that never left the room. Even in triumph, the follow-up care demanded vigilance. Being cancer-free did not mean forgetting risk. It meant monitoring it quietly. And that quiet required discipline. Protecting the children became the highest priority. The strategy was clear: shield them from worst-case scenarios, offer reassurance without overwhelming detail. They were told enough to understand that their mother was healing, but not enough to feel the weight of uncertainty. William insisted on preserving normalcy at almost any cost. School routines continued. Family dinners remained sacred. Laughter was encouraged. He believed stability was the strongest medicine for young hearts. Only a limited circle knew the full extent of Catherine's medical path. Advisors, select medical staff, a handful of senior family members. Information was compartmentalized deliberately, not out of distrust, but necessity. In an institution built on reputation, leaks are not merely embarrassing, they are destabilizing. The fear of unintended exposure lingered constantly. Even well-meaning whispers could spiral into headlines. The household staff felt the emotional strain as well. They carried secrets while maintaining composure. They adjusted schedules discreetly. They learned to speak cautiously in corridors, to lower voices instinctively. A single overheard phrase could ignite speculation. The palace, for all its grandeur, became a space of controlled communication. Transparency existed, but it was carefully rationed. Discussing serious matters within those walls became an exercise in vigilance. Conversations that once felt private now carried the awareness of proximity. Doors were closed. Steps were measured. Yet even with those precautions, vulnerability persisted. No system is flawless. No environment completely sealed. The human element, unpredictable, innocent, curious, always remains. And it was within one of those carefully guarded conversations that something slipped, something no one anticipated. Children don't always understand medical terminology, but they understand tone, they understand fear, and they understand when something is wrong. According to palace sources, the words Louis overheard were not dramatic, but they carried weight. A reference to uncertainty, a mention of complications, a pause too long to ignore. It was never the full conversation. He did not hear context. He did not hear reassurance. He caught fragments, the kind adults dismiss as harmless when separated from explanation. But to a child already aware that his mother had been unwell, those fragments were not neutral. They were alarming. The phrase, "if something changes," echoed louder in his mind than the softer words that followed. Without meaning to, the adults had handed him a puzzle without giving him the pieces to solve it. Louis did what children often do when confronted with confusion. He internalized it first. He watched more closely. He listened more carefully. The shift was subtle, almost invisible at first. He grew quieter during moments when Catherine's name surfaced. His laughter paused more quickly. He lingered near doorways longer than usual. These were not dramatic signs of distress. They were whispers of awareness. Princess Anne noticed. She always does. Known for her observational precision, she recognized the difference between ordinary childhood mood and something deeper. There was a calculation in Louis's questions. Not direct, not confrontational, but probing. "Is everything still okay?" he asked casually one afternoon. "Do doctors ever get things wrong?" The phrasing was careful, but the intention was clear. He was searching for confirmation that the fear he sensed was not real. In that moment, Anne began assembling the pieces. The overheard words, the altered demeanor, the cautious curiosity. It did not take long for her to realize that innocence had brushed against uncertainty. And once a child senses fragility in a parent, it changes something fundamental. Protection had not failed entirely, but it had cracked. The devastating truth was not that Louis had heard too much. It was that he had heard just enough. Enough to create doubt. Enough to imagine scenarios far worse than reality. Children often fill gaps in knowledge with their own fears, and those fears can grow silently. Anne understood the psychological risk immediately. Silence in this context could deepen anxiety. The palace atmosphere shifted quietly once more. Conversations became even more guarded. But this time, the focus was not on preventing leaks, it was on repairing trust within the family. Emotional damage does not announce itself loudly. It surfaces in hesitation, in watchful glances, in the way a child studies a parent's face for reassurance. And that is precisely what Louis had begun to do. The question was no longer simply what he heard. It was what he believed it meant. And belief, especially in young hearts, carries extraordinary power. But Princess Anne is not easily shaken, and what she did next revealed her quiet strength. When others react with panic, Princess Anne responds with precision. Known for her unwavering composure, she reportedly sensed something was wrong before anyone else. Louis was quieter, watchful, processing. And Anne understood immediately this was not mischief. This was fear. Anne has always possessed a rare instinct when it comes to children. Not indulgent, not overly sentimental, but attentive. She observes before she intervenes. With Louis, she did not rush to correct behavior or dismiss his questions. She studied the pauses between them, the hesitation in his voice, the way his eyes lingered when Catherine's health was mentioned. It was subtle but unmistakable. Something had unsettled him. Her approach was calm, almost deceptively simple. No dramatic confrontation, no overwhelming reassurances. She chose conversation. Quiet. Direct. She sat beside him, not above him. Asked gentle questions rather than offering immediate answers. "You seem thoughtful lately," she said. "Is there something you've been thinking about?" The invitation was open, not accusatory. And that made all the difference. Louis did not immediately reveal what he had heard. Children rarely do. Instead, he circled around it. "Do doctors always know what will happen?" he asked. "What does complication mean?" The words were careful, curious, but beneath them lay anxiety. Anne did not correct him. She did not dismiss the concern. She confirmed what she needed to know without pressing too hard. Yes, he had overheard something troubling. The realization was swift and clear. Protection had been imperfect, but panic would only magnify the mistake. Anne made a strategic choice to shield William and Catherine from immediate alarm. Not because they should not know, but because emotional timing matters. Catherine's recovery required stability. William was already carrying enough weight. Anne understood that leadership sometimes means absorbing tension quietly before redistributing it responsibly. Her reassurance to Louis was measured, honest, but controlled. She explained that doctors use words like uncertainty because they are careful, not because they are afraid. She reframed complication as caution, not catastrophe. She reinforced what he already knew, that his mother was healing, that progress had been real, that adults sometimes discuss possibilities to stay prepared, not because danger is certain. At the same time, Anne reinforced boundaries around private conversations. Security was tightened, not dramatically but deliberately. Doors closed more carefully, discussions relocated. The palace, already vigilant, recalibrated once more. But this time the focus was not secrecy from the public, it was emotional safety within the family. Anne understood something fundamental. Children do not require silence to feel secure. They require truth delivered in a way they can hold without fear. Honesty builds trust. Silence can breed imagination. And imagination, when fueled by fragments, can be more frightening than reality itself. Yet even as Anne worked to calm the situation, the larger question loomed: what does this mean for Catherine's recovery and the family's fragile peace? Victory over illness does not erase vulnerability. Catherine may be cancer-free, but the emotional aftershocks linger. And when a child senses fear that adults tried to hide, it forces an uncomfortable reckoning. Was the protection strategy flawed? When William learned what had happened, the reaction was not explosive, it was heavy. A quiet stillness settled over him. He had fought to preserve stability. He had insisted on routine, on reassurance, on shielding his children from worst-case language. And yet, despite every precaution, uncertainty had slipped through. Not publicly, not catastrophically, but intimately. That realization struck deeper than any headline ever could. Catherine's response carried a different weight. Beneath relief and gratitude for her recovery, a flicker of guilt surfaced. Had she underestimated what her children could sense? Had the effort to protect them created confusion instead of comfort? Illness already demands strength. Now she faced the emotional complexity of motherhood under scrutiny. Not the scrutiny of the press, but of a child searching for certainty in her expression. That cuts differently. The psychological balance between shielding and informing became the center of quiet debate within the household. Protect innocence? Or build resilience through honesty? Too much detail risks fear. Too little risks imagination. William and Catherine had chosen caution. Now they questioned whether caution had unintentionally amplified anxiety. The dilemma was not about blame, it was about growth. Palace advisors were drawn into reflection as well. Communication protocols, once designed primarily to prevent leaks, were reconsidered through a more human lens. Security measures protect institutions, but families require emotional transparency. The monarchy, often focused on image, now faced an internal reckoning about emotional clarity. Not for the public, for the children who live within its walls. Anne, steady as ever, advocated for recalibration. Not radical openness, not oversharing, but honest language delivered in age-appropriate ways. She reminded them that children do not crumble under truth, they crumble under confusion. Resilience is not built by silence, it is built by trust. Her influence carried weight because it was grounded in experience. She had seen crises unfold. She understood that emotional repair requires deliberate action. Within days, subtle conversations began. Not dramatic sit-downs filled with heavy terminology. Just moments of reassurance. Clear explanations. Gentle affirmations that Catherine was healing. That monitoring was precaution, not alarm. The goal was not to erase what Louis heard. It was to reframe it, to replace imagined catastrophe with grounded reality. Healing, they realized, is layered. Physical recovery is only one dimension. Emotional restoration requires acknowledgement. The family had survived illness, but now they were navigating its echo. And echoes, if ignored, grow louder. By confronting the moment instead of dismissing it, they strengthened something deeper than privacy, they strengthened trust. But this was not just about one overheard sentence, it exposed something deeper within the monarchy itself. For centuries, the monarchy survived by controlling narrative. But in a modern age of instant information, can anything truly stay contained? If a child within the palace can overhear sensitive details, what does that say about the illusion of control? The royal institution has long relied on discipline of message. Statements crafted, timing calculated, silence deployed strategically. Control was protection. Protection was stability. From abdications to scandals, the crown endured by mastering what the public knew and when they knew it. Confidentiality was not merely habit, it was survival. But crisis exposes pressure points. And this moment revealed one that could not be ignored. Even within the most guarded circles, human emotion complicates containment. Catherine's medical journey intensified private discussions. The inner circle narrowed, voices lowered. But fear, concern, and vigilance altered the atmosphere. In emotionally charged times, tension travels faster than information. It lingers in tone, in posture, in pauses between words. And those signals are impossible to lock behind doors. Anne recognized this not as an isolated misstep, but as a systemic vulnerability. It was never just about Louis overhearing a phrase. It was about the realization that emotional energy inside the palace had shifted enough to be sensed by those not meant to carry it. The illusion of total control cracked subtly, not publicly, not dramatically, but internally. The limits of privacy became clearer. In a world where news breaks in seconds, the monarchy had adapted externally. But internally, tradition still favored compartmentalization. This incident suggested that while information could be restricted, emotion could not. You cannot silence anxiety. You cannot mute concern. And when those emotions ripple outward, even children can detect them. Institutional pressure often focuses on external optics. Reputation, stability, public confidence. But this moment reframed the conversation towards something more intimate: family resilience. Anne understood that modern monarchy must balance confidentiality with emotional literacy. The symbolic shift was subtle yet profound. Strength no longer meant withholding. It meant communicating responsibly within the family first. There was also a quiet awareness of risk. If internal stability fractures, it can eventually surface externally. Not through scandal, but through perception. A royal family that appears emotionally distant from one another undermines the very narrative of unity they project. The incident with Louis served as a warning. The crown must evolve not only in public transparency, but in private clarity. And so recalibration began. Not through dramatic reform, but through introspection. How conversations are framed, how children are included appropriately, how emotional tone is managed as carefully as official statements. The monarchy's historic reliance on secrecy remains, but now it competes with a growing recognition that authenticity strengthens loyalty. This was not a collapse of control. It was an awakening, a reminder that the future of the crown depends not only on managing headlines, but on nurturing trust within its own walls. And perhaps the most unexpected catalyst for that realization was the smallest member of the family. And as the palace recalibrates, the spotlight quietly returns to Louis, the youngest royal, who may have understood more than anyone realized. Sometimes the smallest voices reveal the biggest truths. Louis may not grasp medical terminology, but he sensed something fragile. And in his quiet awareness, the royal family confronted a truth they could no longer avoid: children are not shielded by silence. What startled everyone was not what he heard, but how he processed it. There was no dramatic outburst, no tears, just observation. A question asked too carefully, a pause that lingered longer than it should have. Louis displayed an emotional intelligence that caught the adults off guard. He did not understand complications or uncertainty in clinical terms, but he understood the weight behind them. Children do not decode vocabulary, they decode tone. And the tone had shifted. Fear, when unspoken, becomes heavier. Adults believe they are protecting innocence by withholding detail, but children often fill silence with imagination. And imagination can be more frightening than truth. Louis sensed tension and quietly built his own interpretation. That was the moment Princess Anne recognized the deeper issue. This was not about one overheard sentence. It was about emotional transparency. Anne approached William not with criticism, but with clarity. Calm, direct, protective. She reminded him that strength is not always about shielding, sometimes it is about guiding. William, already balancing anxiety and responsibility, had been trying to carry the emotional burden alone. His instinct was defense. But defense had unintended consequences. A child had felt the tremor beneath the surface. Catherine, upon learning what happened, did not react with alarm. She reacted with resolve. Her first concern was not reputation, not perception, but reassurance. She reaffirmed stability in the only way that truly matters within a family. Through presence. Through warmth. Through the quiet promise that while illness may test them, it does not define them. Her strength was no longer just physical recovery. It was emotional leadership. Slowly, conversations shifted. Not heavy disclosures. Not overwhelming detail. But honest reassurance. William knelt to meet his son at eye level. Catherine softened explanations into language a child could hold without fear. The rebuilding of emotional trust did not require grand gestures, it required consistency. And in that consistency, something powerful emerged. The household began to recalibrate not just communication, but connection. Silence was replaced with gentle openness. Questions were welcomed instead of redirected. And Louis, once watchful and uncertain, began to settle. The crisis had exposed vulnerability, but it also strengthened bonds. Trust, once shaken, became deeper because it was rebuilt intentionally. Unexpected maturity surfaced from the youngest among them, not in solemnity but in empathy. Louis learned that fear can be spoken and met with comfort. William learned that leadership at home demands the same courage as leadership in public. Catherine learned that survival is not just about defeating illness, it is about protecting the emotional fabric of her family. In confronting this delicate moment, the royal family discovered something profound. Resilience is not measured in secrecy, but in shared strength. Crisis had threatened their calm. Instead, it refined it. And within that refinement, the monarchy appeared not distant or untouchable, but human. And yet, even as calm returns, the question lingers: what lasting impact will this moment leave on the future king's youngest son? One overheard sentence may not make headlines, but within palace walls, it can change everything. This was not about scandal. It was about awareness, about vulnerability, about the realization that even royalty cannot outrun human fragility. And perhaps, in this unexpected moment, Princess Anne discovered something far more important than what Louis heard. She discovered what the monarchy must become. The incident did not explode into chaos. There were no emergency meetings broadcast to the world. Instead, there was something quieter. A pause. A recalibration. Princess Anne, long regarded as the steady spine of the family, understood that this was not a failure of protection but a signal. The old model silence equals strength had cracked, and in that crack, light filtered through. For generations, the institution survived by mastering composure. Emotions were managed, narratives were controlled, personal turmoil was folded neatly behind closed doors. But this was different. This was not an external threat. It was internal awareness. A child had sensed instability, not because of betrayal or exposure, but because human fear cannot be entirely concealed. That realization forced a shift. Not dramatic, not public, but foundational. Anne's influence began to ripple subtly. Conversations grew more intentional. The younger generation was no longer shielded by distance but guided with clarity. She did not advocate for oversharing. She advocated for balance. Emotional transparency within the family did not weaken the crown, it fortified it. For the first time, vulnerability was not treated as a liability. It was recognized as a bridge. Catherine, having walked through illness and emerged stronger, viewed motherhood through a renewed lens. Survival had changed her. Not into someone hardened, but into someone deeply aware of time's fragility. She no longer saw reassurance as something to ration. She saw it as something to give freely. In protecting her children from fear, she realized she must also equip them to understand it. That subtle transformation may be her most enduring legacy. William too evolved. Leadership had once meant control, poise, predictability. Now it meant presence. It meant kneeling down, listening, acknowledging that even future kings experience doubt. Through vulnerability, he discovered authority of a different kind, one built not on distance, but on connection. The future monarch began to understand that transparency within the family would shape transparency with the nation. The monarchy itself stood at a crossroads. Perfection had long been its armor. But perfection is isolating. Humanity invites loyalty. This quiet episode symbolized something larger, a transition from secrecy to sensitivity, from guardedness to grounded strength. The institution did not crumble because a child overheard something. Instead, it matured, it adapted, it recognized that modern royalty must reflect modern expectations. And within that evolution lies a profound truth. Strength includes softness. Authority can coexist with empathy. Tradition does not vanish when compassion enters the room, it deepens. Princess Anne may have uncovered what Louis heard, but what she truly uncovered was the emotional architecture of the future. A monarchy capable of listening inward before speaking outward. No proclamation will mark this change. No official statement will detail it. Yet its impact may echo longer than any headline. Because when children are allowed to understand, they grow resilient. When leaders admit fragility, they grow trusted. And when institutions embrace humanity, they grow enduring. And as the palace doors close once more, one truth echoes louder than any whisper in times of crisis. Even the smallest ears can change the course of history. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.